What is up, everybody? This is TPI, the Total Podcast Idiots, coming at you on this weekend. Um, on the flip, actually, it's a big moment of the season, or in between seasons, I suppose. As you can see, idiot number one, Rob, is not here right now. He had an emergency that he needed to address. So it's just me, but I do have a guest, and this is FurySK. That I always think about it as when someone posts in the forums, it's like a bat signal for you to come help. But yeah, thanks for joining us, Fury. Welcome.
Glad to be here. Looking forward to this.
Yeah. So, like we've said, we've hinted and teased it, that today is going to be a lot of like reviewing the rosters and teams of mostly new or lower level teams, but and giving our advice. But I think we've got some questions from some high level teams, in fact. So that'll be pretty funny to take a look at, and fun too, not just funny. Yeah. So Fury is really well regarded, I'd say, and well known for just posting like really detailed analysis on rosters, on if a player meets certain requirements and how to play, and especially recruiting, right? Is that what you'd say your strengths are?
Yeah. So what I like to do when I see somebody post in the forums in general is to look and see kind of how new they are. I like kind of focusing on helping somebody who's just coming into the game get from the point where they don't really know or understand anything to the point where they can kind of manage on their own. That hurdle can be easy. It can be difficult. Just depends on kind of the person, how many sim management games they've played in the past. Um, I would definitely say that recruiting is my strength. Tactics is kind of the weaker point for me, but I would say that I know enough basics on tactics to kind of help people get a start, and then from there, kind of learn on their own.
Yeah, I remember when I first started, I posted, I think, in both the forum and the Discord, and you were like one of the first people to respond to me too. Yeah. And yeah, one of the players you suggested was that 13 pot point guard that ended up like leading Biola last season to like that number one seed and far run. That was McMillan, who was like a 190 SI eventually, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wish I got him, but I didn't.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of players out there, so I'm sure he found somebody that was pretty competent in his own right.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, so just clearly Fury knows what he's talking about. Like, definitely listen to what he has to say, especially if you're one of these teams that has asked us, reached out for advice. And thank you to all those teams. We hope to hit all of your questions. Um, yeah, I mean, let's get into it.
Sure.
Actually, these teams, we're gonna try to be both specific on our advice, but then generalize it so anybody listening can kind of apply it too, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go with UC San Diego to start off with, and so this is Alex J's team, and he kind of, I think, had a really general um like he wanted general roster analysis, is I guess, and we'll probably bunch in these first few teams. This is going to be more like broad, I'd say. So yeah, UC San Diego here. I'm just looking at their roster, but I can pull up their recruiting situation too, because I know that'll be important. Wow, he's on a lot of seniors. Is this the right team? Oh boy, that's a mess already, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely a good chunk of seniors on his board, but at least a lot of them are low, and he's staying in state. So while I wouldn't necessarily put too much into interest, um, I'd rather use the watch function that Steve has brought us in the last couple of seasons to kind of keep track of people. Probably hasn't spent too many contacts on a lot of these players. I would think that Brennan and Kreider are probably the two that he's spent a reasonable amount on, and it looks like he's got a chance at either one of those.
Yeah. I know he had previous interest like last season on Kreider at least. So it's not like all of the points from the flip have been spent on this class completely right now. My issue is he only has one scholarship available for next season, but he's on 6 players and he's already offered all of them.
Yeah, that's not the ideal circumstance. You probably don't want to go. I'm kind of okay with going +1 on your scholarships just because you tend to lose somebody along the way. But to be +5 and probably spending 20-ish contacts on the 4 that are at low interest based on them all being in state, yeah, I can definitely see why you have some concerns there.
Yeah. I mean, you have a very mathematical approach to recruiting though, right? You always talk about it being 135 contacts every season, and then you multiply that out by, per scholarship and or you divide that by per scholarship and, multiply that by the number of seasons the player or that scholarship specifically will be on your team, right?
Yeah, so basically I look at it from a pure math standpoint. I say, okay, I've got X amount of contacts. It doesn't change whether or not you redshirt or don't redshirt somebody in terms of the total over those 5 seasons. But if you don't redshirt them, then you only have them for 4. So the turnover period's a little bit lower. So the trade-off is, do you have somebody almost always redshirting and you only play with a 10 or 11 man roster in a lot of seasons? Or do you turn it over a little bit quicker, not have the value add there, and I guess just not enough contacts sometimes to go around would be the problem you'd hit in that situation.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of what I think is going to be the problem here. I mean, if UC San Diego is spending so much on players, they definitely cannot have all of them. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a waste. I mean, I understand why they're putting in so many. I mean, these are good prospects. It looks like. I mean, all of them are over 100 SI. There's 2 4-stars. There's 2 big men. Docker and Schroeder. I don't. I never was really impressed by them, but I mean, I guess I never really took a huge, super close look at them. Good post player, smart player, ball handler. I mean, he's okay. I don't know. He's a weird fit. He's like a small forward.
He's let's just break down the player here since we got him on the screen. So
Sure.
the first issue that would kind of ring out to me is he's more of the small forward height, maybe a short or maybe a short power forward, but I kind of doubt it. Uh,
Yeah,
his
I would doubt
growth,
that.
his growth. Let's see. He started at 5'9". A lot of people go on this number system where they look at it and say, okay, you've got maybe 7.5, maybe 8 inches worth of growth on a player.
Yeah.
So at 5'9", you're looking at basically exactly where the projected height is. So the chances that he really blows that out of the water are pretty low, especially
Mhm.
given the height increase at every season. Some players, if you look at their height season over season, the first 3 seasons, they go nowhere. So if they're going nowhere, it likely means that you can get them to develop once they come in as a college true freshman. And if you redshirt them or even just play them, they'll grow probably another inch, inch and a half when you get there. So that's kind of something you have to look out for, but not specifically in this case. So then
Yeah. Yeah.
when we look at this specific player and consider him as a small forward, the obvious concern, I think, for both of us would be to look at that 3 value that he's got for his interior defense and say, well, he's not really going to be capable playing from the small forward position against opponents that have that kind of value there.
Yeah.
Nothing else really stands out as too poor to play. So maybe he could play him as a shooting guard and just kind of have him be a little bit oversized. I think a 2-point shooting guard basically is what this is going to end up being. So he could have value, but it's kind of a weird player based on his height and his lack of inside or interior defense.
Yeah. I totally agree. Yeah, shooting guard, maybe small forward. I don't know. I mean, it's not a bad player to be on. I mean, Redlands is on them, and Redlands is not a bad team either. But I don't know if I would have like put a scholarship on him or anything. Yeah. So let's take a look at this other guy, Dockery. He's a bit bigger, projects to be a bit bigger, but he has more teams on him. Slightly, definitely better growth than SI. Kind of a similar player though overall to Schroeder, in fact, right?
Yeah, it's basically the same player repeated, just another inch on his height. Again, 5'10" starting point. Didn't grow that first season, but it looks like he's already getting close to 6'6". So if he
Mhm.
shoots over that, I think it's probably only about a half inch. I don't think you'll get a full inch or more out of that. So don't look for him to go above 6'6.5" or 6'7".
Yeah. So just like right off the bat, I mean, if I'm UC San Diego, I would focus on these four players and probably just two of them really in terms of like where I put my points at this point.
At this point, you're at low on some of these guys that already have somebody at high within the competition pool. So
Oh
with that
yeah.
in mind, you just consider those two players at the top gone. And really, Dockery at this point is also to the point where you almost have to consider cutting him loose as well from your list. Uh,
Yeah. Sorry, my like I have our faces over here normally, and so they were blocking like the competition on my window.
yeah. So
But yeah, yeah.
it's basically down to Brennan, who's got high on the competition, but he's also at a high level. So I'm guessing that's probably his number one choice. Uh,
Yeah.
Looking briefly at him, he's got decent wingspan vertical. He's got the 6'2" height to start with, so 6'10" looks like a reasonable projection. Really good rebounder, going to be a decent shooter. May not have great interior defense, and he actually has a negative comment there.
Mhm.
But if you can, I guess my other point that I would look at is what are his other skills looking like? Is he able to pass and distribute? Is he able to handle? Because that will kind of give you an idea of whether or not he'll be a good possession interior guy. Because you can either just
Yeah.
defend real well, or you can out rebound and steal the ball and potentially block shots. If you do enough of those right and have a low turnover rate, that's also a good recipe for a decent big, especially if you're at a lower level. If you're in Division 6 through about Division 4, there are a lot of teams that are either kind of struggling human controlled players or bots, and they don't necessarily have the best talent to work with. They'll have people with deficiencies. So sneaking a guy in like Brennan wouldn't be that big of a deal at that level. It really would only matter to me once I got to about Division 3. I think somebody would take advantage of me.
Yeah, yeah. But I know NAF has been talking a lot about this guy in the Discord. And yeah, this is one of his like main targets. So it'll be a tough battle. And then you also have East Bay, who's like LL 2 or 3, I think. 2, yeah, 2.1. So I don't know. That'd be a tough battle to win. I mean, everybody's already on high, so it's kind of like you're already invested. So
For what's worth, I actually think that the other guy that he's in on, that he's got the medium interest on, he's got somebody low in on
mhm.
that, but it's a smaller school and it's a school that doesn't even have their scholarship in yet. So they're just kind of looking at him. I actually like this player as more of a small forward than the other guys that we were looking at before because clearly has good rebounding already, is going to continue to have good rebounding. It's going to have good handling. Really,
Mhm.
the only downside is the sluggish comment from a small forward perspective. I kind of sort of personally like it to be at 8, but you could get away with that if you play a little bit slower tempo and your opponents aren't really pressing and playing their tempo to +2, +3, etc. So I
Yeah,
think he could
yeah.
be a great backup option if he loses out on the other guy, and it looks like he's not really going to have to spend a lot more. So I think for him, it's down to those two players.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I like Kreider as a power forward personally. Then the speed isn't as much of an issue either. But I can see he would work a lot as a small forward too. I mean, he could even be like a small center, I guess, at 6'6" projected. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, again, we're at Division 5.8 in this
yeah,
specific case. So you
right.
could get away with the 6'6" center. You could get away with a power forward that maybe just has okay offense. There are no comments, but it looks like the inside shot's already pretty high, so you can probably project that out. I'd say at worst maybe +1 across each of the 4 or 5 seasons. So 13 or
Mhm.
14 wouldn't be that unrealistic. So yeah, I can definitely see the power forward or small forward, maybe less so the center or the shooting guard or any of those positions.
Yeah,
But
right.
yeah, I
All
do like
right.
the fact that he's also got great passing on that player too. I mean,
Oh, did
again,
he?
that yeah, I
Oh.
mean those are all solid stats. So again, someone that's not going to perhaps turn the ball over and still distribute to somebody else. You can never
Mhm.
have too many of them.
For sure. Yeah. Um, okay, so that was the recruiting. I don't we didn't have to start there, but it just kind of caught my eye when I first clicked on it. But yeah, the roster itself right now. I mean, you have more general advice right now, I guess, or we wanted to keep it more general just because we don't know where this team really wants to go, I guess, right?
Yeah, so I guess the two things that I saw that were talked about for San Diego were kind of his pace that he may or may not want to run with his particular team, and then kind of the talent in terms of the depth chart. Talent wise, I actually think, given the class that they are all in, I mean, if we look at it, it's what, one redshirt senior and a bunch of players that are either freshman, sophomore, junior, all pretty much redshirts. So he's got a lot of depth. You could go down pretty much all the way down the roster, and he doesn't have to redshirt anybody, and they're all over 100. So I think you could really look at this team and say, well, even if they don't promote this season, all these guys come back. They all have somewhere between +8 to +15 to all their skill sets based on their SI bump. I think that team's actually pretty solid, even if some of the skills we look at we don't like as much. For example, I kind of don't like anybody that's below a certain IQ rating just because I think it generates bad options for them as far as passing the ball, rebounding, defensive decisions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm starting to heed that advice a little bit more because some of my teams have like not the greatest IQs either. And I always feel like, oh, there's like, yeah, some level of underperformance going on. And yeah, you can see on these five guys, wait, five, yeah. Below that Richard Senior, we're talking about next year, really. Like none of them are over 10. That's an issue. I know Cornette's the starting center and he's only a 6 in IQ, which is like okay for a center, but I mean, it's not bad to have high IQ either.
Yeah,
Like you said.
especially at the point guard and shooting guard, you tend to have a lot more of the movement, even in a simulated game where it's all about the numbers. That's still
Mhm.
where Steve's got all the offense basically going through most of the time. So if those guys have, if the shooting guard has 9 or 10, it's passable. I don't have a problem with running somebody out there like that. But once you start looking at single digits on your point guard, you're kind of risking it, I would say, as far as being able to have your point guard make the right decisions. You might end up having the guy with 5 or 6 assists, but he also might generate you 3 or 4 turnovers. He might actually go 5 and 5 on those numbers. So it's a bit of
Yeah,
a worry
yeah,
in those situations for sure.
right. And you see this point guard Joyce. I don't know if he like starts or anything. I mean, I guess I could take a look, but he's got a 6 IQ. He started the majority of the games last season, so he averaged over 3 turnovers a game. Yeah, it's not ideal, certainly.
Yeah, 3.5 on the assist, 3.1 on the turnovers. It's kind of that's a product I think I feel I don't have any solid proof of this, but I kind of feel like experience is kind of one of those stats that you don't see but tends to actually be there.
Hmm.
So some of that I would consider maybe it's just because he was a freshman or whatever the case may be, maybe just this first 15, 20 starts. Okay, I can live with that. But I think it's probably in this case more about the lack of his high IQ rating that is causing that.
Right. Yeah. I also agree that like experience is some hidden thing just because I've always had issues with like JUCOs, freshmen, like it doesn't matter if it's their first season of major playing time, they always seem to like take a little bit to get started or are inconsistent. Yeah, I've definitely noticed that too.
Yep. So
Um, what else about this team? I mean, it is really deep in terms of just like raw SI in The staminas look really good. The speeds are fine for the most part. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like,
defense. I mean, defense is okay. I don't know. It could be better.
hey, you could say it could be better, could be worse, but again, at the level that we're playing at, sometimes we get caught up in kind of looking at the numbers that we're at. Like I'm in Division 2 right now, so I may look at this roster and say, "Oh, these values are kind of poor." But if you were to play this out in say Division 6 or Division 5, the ceiling that you have to hit to be able to promote or be comfortable with your team really is closer to like the 130 to 140 range rather than the
Mhm.
150 to 160. So that's why I kind of looked at this team and said, okay, he's got a lot of good SI values. He's got a decent amount of players that can shoot, a couple of guys that can defend, a couple of guys that can rebound, a lot of guys that can pass. I mean, there's a whole bunch of double digits there. So
Yeah.
really there isn't a team weakness. There's maybe not a whole lot of strength in any one spot, but he's not really that bad off anywhere. So uh,
Yeah. No, that's you're totally right. I totally agree.
what
Yeah. So I don't know. This is like a really deep team and it's versatile. So you could probably play matchups and see what works, I guess, right?
yeah. So I guess the last question I saw for him was pace oriented. And
Mhm.
this is kind of one of those things that we talk about a lot on the forums or the Discord. Kind of is fast pace only good when you're better than the other team? Is there any circumstance where it's still viable? And while I don't really have the answer for him on this specific case, I do tend to think that you have to play out kind of your non-conference schedule and kind of get an idea for what your team looks like. Compare, I guess, compare the teams that are within that non-conference schedule to some of your conference opponents and try and figure out, okay, am I going to be a plus value for my shooting percentage in comparison? Am I going to get more chances? So have more field goal attempts? Am I going to make more of them? Am I stealing more often? Am I getting more assists? You basically just have to play it by ear in a lot of these situations. So it's real hard for me as somebody from a different kind of setup of a team to kind of come in and evaluate that for a couple of these teams that want to kind of know that, because you almost have to actively play and just see what the game tells you. And from there, make your decisions. Do I slow it down and kind of play safer? Or do I keep pressing and hope to foul guys out, or just continue to score a lot more buckets than my opponent?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's tough to give advice on tactics because some people just, I feel like, do what they want to do anyways too. Okay, um, let's move on to our next team, and it's kind of like the same situation. This is going to be the Central Arkansas Bears. Um, yeah, so let's see. Let's look at their recruiting and then their
Yeah.
roster.
If I remember about this specific team that I was looking at, I think this was one of the teams that didn't necessarily have a lot of their own players in yet.
Yeah, I know these sophomores were like the president joined at the end of this class right here, but they weren't like recruited by him, and so the freshman is like this president's first group.
Yeah. So I guess the question that he had again was more tactical oriented.
Mhm.
And based on what you see here, it's not really that easy to kind of come up with a solution that's going to be viable right off the bat, right? He's got a couple of his own players, but he really hasn't had the time to bring people in that are collectively kind of playing a specific way. And you know, for me, I kind of look at this and say, well, he's got a guy that's got decent inside shooting, but he's a senior. He's got a couple sophomores that are kind of close to that value.
Mhm.
Collins, I see there, is not too bad. Pascal is a freshman. Uh, those guys you can generate probably 12 to 14 in your inside shot and be okay there, but he doesn't have that as his MO. So going through and looking at some of the other areas on his team, doesn't have a huge amount of guys that are young that can shoot from the outside. Doesn't have, I guess he does have quite a few that have decent 3-point potential, but then you also look at defense. Can't really say that he's really that strong yet on defense.
Mhm.
Sixes and sevens are okay to bring in as kind of freshman, sophomore level numbers, but you're kind of looking at double digits as the kind of break point. So at this point, my personal advice is just keep recruiting, kind of have an idea of what kind of team you want. Do you want defense? Do you want it to be distribution heavy? Do you want to shoot from the inside? Do you want to shoot from the outside? Kind of make that call first, then kind of bring the players in from there. And it'll be easier for me to kind of answer his specific questions once he's got more than 3 players that he's specifically brought in.
Yeah, I mean, I know this team and the next team, they both talked about wanting to be more defense oriented. So let's just get into like what to look for on defense if you have any advice on that, for like specific player builds,
Yep. So it's basically have a decent height and or have decent inside defense and or have good rebounding and handling. If you
Mhm.
have 2 or 3 of those, then you're going to have all the pieces or most of the pieces you need to actually be able to defend a lot of what you're going to face at the level he's facing now. As you kind of
Wait,
recruit,
why is handling important in defense?
for me, it's a indicator of how well the player can keep the ball rather than turning the ball over. Additionally, I kind of see it in the same vein as driving, and it can be amplified or kind of reduced based on your IQ. So in
Mhm.
this case, if we look at somebody who's say 10 handling and has an 11 IQ, which is what I'm looking at mulling right on the center of the screen, I would say that that handling probably
Mhm.
rings
Oh,
true.
this
But
guy.
if you go up one guy to Pascal, you're looking at 7 handling with 6 IQ. So I almost think that player is going to play more like a 6 value or a 5 value on my team. So you
Right, right. But I mean, like, what about? Sorry, in reference to defense, though, right? Is this
well,
important?
it depends on what you consider your defense to be. Like some
Oh,
people play and consider it to be just defending shots.
mhm.
For me, it's can you defend shots or can you create enough havoc to where you steal the ball and take away chances? Can you out rebound a guy so they don't get second chances? If those metrics are high, then you can kind of offset some of the loss of value that you have on your height or your inside defense. So those are metrics that
Oh.
I personally look at. If I've got a guy that's kind of fringe, like say he's a 6 value, does
Mhm.
he at least have the rebounding or the ability to turn the ball over or keep the ball and make good passes and get people producing at a higher percent efficiency?
I get
If
what
they
you're saying now.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if they can do that, then you can kind of overlook maybe a mediocre inside defense. But certainly if you had a 2, a 3, a 4 to start with, those guys are never going to get over a 7 or an 8, even if they don't have a comment restricting them.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. So height and then height or interior defense in rebounding or ball handling, right? And IQ, of course.
Yeah. You're starting to see why it's kind of complicated for the new guy. You have a whole lot of things that you can actually work with in this game because it's basically all numbers in the end. We like to kind of
Sure.
fantasize that they're players that are playing the game, but it really is just a number applied and a percentage of the time based on that number can go up or down. So
Sure.
for me, I'm either looking for inside defense or height directly since they both kind of impact it, or I'm looking for rebounding or handling to be kind of higher passing or any of that sort of stuff just to see if I can't get an advantage there.
Right. So that was like for big men, or was that for both? Is there anything different on perimeter or wing type of guys?
I mean, rebounding isn't necessarily as big a deal out there. I've had guys with double digits or 13 or 14 or 15 rebounding out there before just because they happen to have that
Mhm.
along with some of the other stuff I liked. And they still only got 3 or 4 rebounds. So to me, that's not necessarily as big a deal for them. I would say it's more to do with speed and less to do with strength the further to the perimeter you go. But that's
Mhm.
not really a defensive stat per se. It's more of a can the guy get in position stat. So if you have a guy with slow speed outside, he's not going to be able to get up court and cover fast. You're kind of anticipating your opponent can't produce a whole bunch of high speed big, so you can kind of get away with a little bit less there.
Right. Yeah. I've started to take speed into account a lot more on defense, especially. Um, I mean, especially for like my D1 team, because I'm facing faster guys on the perimeter now too. And so like my guys struggle, I feel like to keep up and stop their shots, even though I have good defensive ratings, kind of. Not this team, obviously. Like the speed kind of just doesn't put them in position, like you said, to even play defense sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, if your opponent gets all these transition chances, like if they're going 10, 12, 15% transition, and you've got a guy at 5 speed at point guard and they're using their point guard to get up the court and he's at 15, even in a numbers game, you can basically count that as an easy bucket for your opponent. So it's definitely something you have to be careful about when recruiting.
Yeah, I think even not in transition, I think even like half court though,
Mhm.
it can make a big difference too, just because I assume I do like to imagine my players actually playing. So, a guy like just zooming around the court around screens, he'll lose his guy and just be open, if the other guy's too slow, right?
Yep. I definitely think Steve's got it hammered out pretty well at this point. So I would think that speed still has its position within all the defenses.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Just quick look at the recruiting. I know like Peterson and George, this team has been on for more than just the flip. They started on these guys last season. Um, and I think they're pretty good. I mean, Peterson, I mean, I don't know. What do you see here?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I see is he's got 5 open recruits, but he's only going after 3 guys.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people that just start out see that 5 number and say, man, I've got to get 5 people in right now and kind of get this team together. Not necessarily the case. I think 3 is a solid number because you want to, for me, you want to at least balance it out to where every other year has a slightly larger pool of scholarships open. Um, I know your first guest kind of alluded to the fact that you can kind of load up in a given year and make a good run in the tournament or in Division One, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong either. But you don't want to sit there and get to the point where you have 5 or 6 scholarships coming to every single year in one spot because it'll kind of weaken you up a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
I do like the fact that he's got 2 on high and 1 on low, and all of them are at least at the competition level or beating the competition level at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you had a question on Peterson. I guess I don't know, I'm terrible with heights, so I can't
Oh, sorry.
translate that
This
height.
is 6'6". Yeah, I don't have it on the like normal. Just because
Abs-
I wanted to sort it better than how the game has it.
yeah, that's fair. Assuming that the guy can kind of sort of get into the power forward height, 78 inches right now is kind of close, it looks like, but still has a decent wingspan above his height, still has a vertical that's pretty solid.
I think he's done growing too, though, because he's
He is,
already past his projected, and he's already had the 3 growth spurts.
yeah, he's at 7.5. So I think that's probably fair.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but still, you could see the guy playing power forward in the lower division with almost no issue, other than the
Yeah.
strength, I suppose. Because
Right. Yeah.
he's got both defensive ratings, which make him capable of playing, small forward or power forward. He's got rebounding to be able to play power forward. He's got handling and passing and IQ at a decent number. He's got inside shot, outside shot. Basically got it all except for finishing and driving, which kind of gets you to be able to break through specific situations, I guess is the way Steve put it. So, like finishing at the rim, driving through some of the guards, I think that was what he translated to in the help. But I tend not to look too much at those unless they are both projected real low. And it looks like they're
Mhm.
both going to climb to 7s or 8s. So I don't see anything wrong with the guy that he's recruiting here. I think it's fine.
Yeah, it's a good prospect, definitely. Yeah, George, we can take a quick look at him, I guess, too. Um, I think this guy is meant to be a guard, really.
Yeah,
And he looks good. I mean, maybe not offensively, like shooting wise, maybe a little low.
yeah. I
But
guess
yeah,
so. I see the smart player and I see the 9 IQ. So this might be the perfect player to kind of look at the development graph on and see if the IQ is growing. Because I
sure.
think that's something that players sometimes miss when they're looking around. Let's
Yeah,
see.
yeah, that's a good point.
So you'll
So
see on this light blue color is the IQ. He's already gotten 2 bumps in his IQ so far. And so to me, that kind of says he'll probably end up at a 10, maybe an 11 by the time that he gets used in
mhm.
college by the team that ends up recruiting him. So
Yeah, right, right.
some players don't actually grow at all in IQ and some do. So that's something you have to look for if you're looking at specific players. Like I don't necessarily look at it when I'm going to my top 40 or top 50 on my board, whittling it down. I kind of wait till I'm top 15, but it's definitely something that you have to be careful about because some people will look at that and find kind of the hidden gem that can kind of bump their IQ up from, say, an average or mediocre level to an above average or good level.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, right. Yeah, I forget to look at the graphs sometimes too, but they are indicative. And then O'Hara, I think, is just like kind of I don't know. He's definitely a small forward, 6'6" projected. He's currently 6'4.5". Um, but yeah, that does not have much of a shooting touch. It's kind of sucky.
Yeah, my guess is this is kind of the third option, kind of the person that he's looking not to spend a whole lot on.
Mhm,
So for what it's worth, the IQ, the speed are the 2 big factors here. Um,
sure.
Probably not going to gain anything on this IQ this time, but you don't really need to when you're at a 15. So
Yeah, yeah.
uh, while I don't think this is necessarily the greatest player I've seen, I don't see anything wrong if this is kind of your third option in the recruiting class because you can't spend 40 or 50 contacts on every player, you'll just run out. So kind of spending
True.
10 on this guy or 5, if you spend something say below 15 on a player that's kind of just average to kind of help you cement some of your bench, then I think that's a great decision to make. And kind of being frugal with your contacts is never a bad thing.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's a good point. Okay. Yeah, so we talked about this team. Let's move on to our next team. I'm sure we're going too slow, but this is just so fun. So Lamar sent us some questions, kind of similar to Central Arkansas, though, like wanting to run a defensive team. So let's take a look at everything with a focus on that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, his first note he gave us, I think, was a D2 rebuilding note. So he was kind of concerned that he actually got the bump, and this roster looks kind of mediocre. But if you had seen the roster before the turnover had happened, he had a whole bunch of walk-ons on his team
Mhm.
that were all like 150 and like 11 potential. It was one of
Oh,
those crazy situations where somebody just got loaded with 1 and 2 star, but still 10, 11 potential guys, and they all
mhm.
ended up okay. So he rode those guys and got promoted, but he was kind of concerned about whether or not,
You got
I
promoted?
think that was, or was that, oh no, we skipped Maryland. I see.
Oh, sorry, I switched up the order a little bit.
Oh, no problem. We'll go down one,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah. We'll do
we,
Maryland next, I think. Yeah,
yeah. Well, we can speak to that point real quick before going to Lamar here.
sure. Yeah.
I don't think that where you start necessarily is a big deal ever. I
Mm,
started with my team, picked it up at the last 5 days of a recruiting class. Uh, Went down one level from 4 to 5. 2 seasons later was in 6, and then promoted 3 times. But I never saw the issue with demoting. Yeah, you lose probably 7 or 8 contacts worth of value on some of the guys you spent 40 or 50 on. Yeah, you lose 2 or 3 on some of the smaller guys. But
mm.
I, as that being the core question for him, I think that what I would say is I wouldn't worry about demoting back down. If you don't think your team's good enough to compete, and in this case, kind of looks just okay, doesn't look terrible, doesn't look great for him
Let's go.
in his
Let's go to
division.
Maryland here. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would say that in this case, then now that we're looking at the roster that he has, it's probably one of those situations where he's going to end up demoting. So just embrace it, play the guys that you want to actually be a part of your team in the future, get them minutes. You don't necessarily have to start Meeks in this situation, although he doesn't really have too many scholarship players. So
Right. Yeah. So I guess since we're here, we can talk about them. So with like, I think you just play Meeks. Just he's a senior. So actually, would you prefer developing these? Tyson and Mora. I really just those two. Would you play them and develop them, or would you redshirt them and try to save them for a run later potentially?
based on where, let's see, he's only got 5 scholarships, so Meeks, I guess,
Mhm.
plays no matter what. You don't really sit there and work on walk-ons too often.
Yeah.
And the
Right.
one he does have that's actually pretty competent is at 102 as a junior, so he's not going to actually get to the point where he's super useful. So you're going to
Hmm.
start. I would start all 5 of these in this situation. If you're going to redshirt anybody, you redshirt Tyson.
Yeah.
You bite the bullet, you redshirt him. He gets another 10 to 15 SI, and you get an extra year of him when you get more players in. And
Hmm.
that's really what I think he's going to end up having to do, is just redshirt that guy, play the 4 guys that are scholarshiped, and just get them minutes, because none of the other guys are really going to break the doors down. If you get a whole bunch of guys in that you like and you don't want to redshirt all of them, then maybe you redshirt more at that point, because he still has
Hmm.
enough value there.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I might just still redshirt Mora too, but um, I could see a case for playing him definitely. Um, yeah. I mean, it happens, right, with the team that's been neglected, right? The team gets gutted and just doesn't have much, and it's just unfortunate.
But it's also the most fun point, because you really don't have to worry about competing right away. You can go out there, you can recruit, you can get your players together, and you can kind of rebuild a team that's been neglected and is kind of at the bottom, just trying to find its way out and bring it back to the top. In this case, it's at 5, but it's going to probably be at 6 next year if we're being realistic with the person.
Yeah. Yeah. But like you said, yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any way to prevent demotion, so you can play freely, like you said. Yeah. Um, okay, well, let's take a look at their recruits then. So they have 9 scholarships opening up, and looks
Yep.
like they're focusing on 3, which I know, yeah, lines up with a lot of what you said
Yep.
before.
You could definitely stretch this into 4 or maybe even 5, but you're never going to stretch it into 9 for sure.
Yeah, yeah, I
And
wouldn't at
again,
least.
yeah, again, all medium or low on interest, but all matching or above
Or
the
above.
competition. So
Hmm.
he's got a chance at all 3 of the players. The first player on the board has a huge SI value at his
Yeah.
potential. So he's going to be able to play right away. My feeling on whether or not you play a guy versus redshirt in the first season has to do with whether or not he gets full minutes. And a guy like Stringer, you would give every single start given his team that we just looked at, no doubt.
Yeah. Hmm.
So if he's going to get there and get 20, 25 SI, you could redshirt him still as a sophomore and get the last. No, he's only going to be good for maybe another 20 before he hits his soft cap. So this may be one of those rare situations where if this guy develops to 130, goes in place, gets to 150, do you really need to even redshirt a guy like that anymore at 11 potential? To me,
Yeah,
I'd be okay.
it kind of
I would be
seems.
okay.
Yeah, I don't think I would even redshirt him, even though I've kind of prescribed it what your advice before, where you redshirt as many people as possible. But yeah, that definitely seems like a situation where you don't like it's not too advantageous to do so.
And just a quick peek, I guess, at Rossi here and Mason. And
Sure.
they both look at their SI values. The redshirt candidates. Yeah, this is probably a redshirt candidate. kind of an interesting build on this one, though.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty tall at 6'9.5" and projected 7 foot.
Yep.
Not sure he
Got the
gets quite there.
yeah. No, he may not have a shooting touch, but he's already at a 9 inside shot. So that's a nice little boon. I know it kind of speaks more to outside shot, but it still always amuses me when they get that comment and they end up being pretty good on the inside.
Yeah.
But yeah,
He's got higher
monster.
perimeter defense than interior defense, but like interior defense isn't bad at 4 right now, at least. I mean, yeah.
Going to get to a 5, could get to an 8 or a 9 by the time he's a junior or senior. And by that point, what's his rebounding going to be at that number with that comment?
With that size, yeah. Yeah. Oh,
9
and
rebounding now.
Months on the boards. Yeah, I see. Yeah, wow.
So if he ends up being like a 17 or 18 rebounding with a 9 inside defense, I would play him. I think you might play him too because of how
Yeah.
many rebounds and how much control he'd have over the opposition at that number. So
Yeah,
another good.
definitely.
I think this is a reasonable kind of player to look at as kind of the number 2 or number 3 recruit on your board. Maybe not the primary guy, but then again, he's got Stringer for that. So
yeah. And then here's Mason, the third guy. Looks like a pretty typical third guy.
Yep, just a roster fill, but again, decent enough inside defense. Looks like the height. I don't know that he'll make that projection, but if he gets up to that height, could still play inside. So could still be a good fill in there.
Yeah. I didn't even like recognize that he was supposed to be like a big man, just like when I was looking at the recruiting board. But now I can see. Sure, I guess. Yeah, not bad for a third option for sure. Okay, then Lamar for our next team. Yeah.
Yep, I'm not going to ignore Lamar anymore. I'll actually speak about what they have.
Yeah.
The defensive mindset was what he was looking at there. And I think we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with Central Arkansas.
Yeah.
But again, I would just say this in looking at kind of the team he's got put together here. He's got a decent amount of inside defense on a lot of these guys. So it's
a lot of 8s and 9s.
But I would also look to recruit a little bit higher value on rebounding, even at the cost of a little inside defense, especially on somebody that's got enough height on them to be a good big in that regard. To me, it looks like he's going to have a lot of guys that are kind of at 10 rebounding, 10 inside defense. If you could kind of take away 2 inside defense and get 5 or 6 rebounding, or take away a little bit of rebounding and get 2 or 3 more inside defense, or 3 or 4 inches of height on them to get them up to 6'11" or 7 foot. I think that's probably something that he should consider, at least on the defensive aspect inside. But
so I
guess.
Sorry, yeah, go
ahead.
You're saying like, because I see these heights and none of them are like outstanding, but you're saying like the okay interior defense makes up for that though?
I don't know if it makes up for it, but it makes it to where the loss that you're going to have in your inside or your height can be kind of mitigated to some regard, I guess. So when I look at inside defense and I look at height, I kind of have the mental kind of picture of a guy with height being able to block, maybe get 3 or 4 blocks randomly as a big, whereas the other guy's probably not going to block as many shots against the bigger guy. So can you stop the guy that's blocking 3 or 4 of your shots from having success on 2 or 3 of his by having a higher inside defense? Is that trade-off viable for you? So that's why I'm okay. And again, I think Lamar is a Division 6 or Division 5 school.
Yeah, I think there are 6. Yeah.
So you can definitely get away at this level with height more so than you could in 3 or 2. So recruiting at this point, if you're recruiting somebody as a senior in high school, your best bet is probably to promote 2 or 3 times. You're probably not going to promote all 4 years that the guy plays. So you don't have to have somebody in Division 6 that's going to be good in Division 2, because you're not going to be there with that player. You're going to be there with the next group of players. So you can definitely recruit a little bit a little bit smaller in height, a little bit lower in inside defense, a little bit lower in rebounding, or take on some projects at this level, because the bigger schools can't necessarily go after those guys the same way you do. If they go after that guy, they have to find playing time for him. If you're playing somebody that's at like 100 SI as a redshirt freshman, Division 2 or Division 1, a lot of the times you're just going to get crushed at that position. So they
Mhm.
can't really afford to carry that sort of weight. So if you can find a guy that's kind of fringe 100 and you're at Division 6 with not a lot of talent yet, suddenly you can put that guy in. He's going to get another 8, 9, 10 SI on the guy that the bigger team's developing, because the bigger team had to play that guy off the bench and give him 15 minutes instead of 25 to 30.
For sure. Yeah. I forget, did Lamar post in the forums and you answered like his like more specific lineup questions? I forget.
I think, I don't remember if Lamar was one of them, to be quite honest with you. I kind of go through so many of these that I don't always remember exactly which team I've responded to, but I think he was
Yeah,
asking about his redshirt situation going into next year. And he was one of the ones that I didn't give a lot of major uh, information to. I didn't give the full breakdown on the forum like I've done some other teams.
sure.
But
I mean, just to look at this, like, I know we'll probably get into this a little later, but like these bottom three guys on scholarship, like they're so far behind in SI that I don't know if they're playable. Like Davidson is maybe playable off the bench because of his interior defense and rebounding. But like Rinaldi, if he's supposed to be a point guard, I I don't see it. Like I don't see him as playable at all.
yeah, I think some of the recruits that were brought in are perhaps not uh, quite at the level you'd want them to be, but uh,
Right.
that's just part of the learning process. Sometimes is you kind of recruit a guy in, you play him, and you say, "Oh, this isn't working," and
Mhm.
you kind of see what he does, and then you look at somebody else that's kind of a couple of divisions up and see what's working for them. You say, "Okay, they didn't focus on this stat that I focused on, but they focused on this one, and it produced this result for them in this team makeup." And you kind of can use that sort of mindset to kind of mold your team and mold your recruiting targets to reflect what kind of works within the game.
Mhm. Yeah, I know someone commented on the lineup though. I don't know if it was you. But like, yeah, Tarantino probably is your starting center here. Manning definitely should get playing time somewhere. And then everyone else, I'm like, I don't know. Like
Yeah.
seats could definitely play.
What's funny is he's got. I see a sophomore down there, and I commented on this too in the forums.
Mhm.
Davidson, 6 potential, 87 SI. You think no way the guy ever plays, right? But
Right.
if you actually look at what he's got 8 inside defense at that level. He's got 9 rebounding at that level. He's got enough speed and enough IQ at Division 6. The guy actually plays.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Even like
he's
the
not going to
outside
start
shot
every game.
isn't the outside shot and like the strength aren't unusable either.
No. So I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of one of those guys that got recruited. I'm going to assume that was probably a computer that did that to him. But
Mhm.
it's amazing that you can kind of find these guys down in Division 6 that actually have some play value to your team, despite the fact that they have like all the odds stacked against them. So I thought that was kind of amazing with this specific team.
Yeah. So for all these teams that we've done so far that are more like general broad and maybe a little bit more defense focused, I mean, you're looking for size and then interior defense or perimeter defense, I guess. And then either strength or speed. Handling is important now. I learned I never put those two together. So like that makes sense. Um, and IQ is important. So yeah, those should be what you're mostly looking for. I'd say
Uh,
wingspan, I think, is good too.
yep, I like a good wingspan. It doesn't break the deal if the guy doesn't necessarily have that. He's just got to have other things going right for
Yeah,
him. And
yeah.
I mean, you rattled off some stuff that's important for defense. realistically, everything in the game at this point is fairly important. I think probably the only thing that I don't consider as important is range. And that's just
Mhm.
because I don't see that being a very viable strategy to be able to consistently compete, because you can have the games where it just doesn't work because it doesn't work. It's a lower percentage shot, but literally every other rating in here has a major impact on the game.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's definitely like a interplay, a confluence of all of these things, you know. Yeah. I sometimes wonder if there's like an intimidation factor, like if your player is a 130, but you're going up against a 160, but like in terms of the actual important categories, you know, for whatever position they're playing, like they're fairly even. Like, is your player still going to play worse just because like that player seems so much better?
It really just depends on where those ratings are at. I mean, if the guy's got 10 stamina over your guy might keep up with them for 20 minutes out of the 30 that he plays, but for 10 minutes, he's going to get dominated.
Mm-hmm.
If it's speed, then there's going to be possessions where the guy uses his speed properly and just beats him. So I think you're definitely going to see situations where even if the counting stats for that specific position match and others are kind of imbalanced, and your guy is kind of the inferior guy, that you're not going to end up winning a whole lot of those games from that position. You'll kind of see them go -5, -10, maybe -15 or 20, depending on the opponent and how strong their lineup is as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, let's take a quick look at their recruiting board because that's important. Um, I mean, right off the bat, we talked about defense, but we see negative comments across the board in defense for this big man that they're after. Um, but otherwise, this big man looks pretty good, a good rebounder.
Yep.
Although with no comment. Tall though, very tall, 6'11 and a half. Very, I mean, that's a sizable weight. The handling is good. I mean,
Yep.
it's not a bad player.
Yep. And this is kind of a JUCO signing for him. So if he
Yeah.
gets this guy in, redshirts him, which he may or may not do, you could probably project another 8 to 10 skill index this season for this player before
Mhm.
he actually lands on your team. So for me, I'd look at it as I've got a 125 to 130. What do I want to do with the player? With his rebounding, I think that you could definitely make a case that he'll be fine at the level that we're playing at. So I can see why he's starting this guy. He can come in and play either right away, or he can sit out a year, get maybe to 135 to 140 range, and then be a 2 year starter for him. And even at what's going to be a 7 ID at that point, it's still probably good enough to be competitive.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Okay. And then let's look at this other guy, 6'6" power forward, high school senior. But they're behind by a lot to, I think this is Texas State is a LL2 team.
Yeah, that should be Tufts team in
Yeah,
this
I think so.
scoreboard.
I think
So
so. Yeah. Yeah. So already
yeah,
being behind is not great.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's tough. So I mean, if he really wants to beat him out on the player, I won't say no to that, just so I can prod him later. But no, I mean, that's part of this game, though. I mean, you have to make the decision. I think not only Texas State, but North Texas being high and Lamar being a medium, it may be time to kind of consider your other options. It just depends on how high up he's on medium. We can't see if it's medium plus plus. We don't know how long Texas State or North Texas have been on high. So
Right.
uh, he'll know better than I will on that. I can't really help him on that decision, but definitely would
Right.
have at least one or two people on the watch list that fit kind of the role that he wants Wheeler to play, just in case it doesn't work out for him.
Yeah, definitely agree. Agree. Um, okay, and then he's on a 5-star junior. Interesting. He's Notre Dame is out of state. Lamar is the only in-state team. They're both on low. I mean, he must have been newly generated. He looks like a good player.
I can't tell if he's newly generated or if it's just because some of his ratings that we were talking about earlier, like his defense, while say it says a good all around player, he's still only going to be kind of a 7 or an 8 when he hits his day to go from high school senior to college
College.
true. So
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
it won't be his strength, but he's going to have such good offense that he could really do well. His IQ at a 6 is probably the only real big negative I see. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and that, to me, that almost takes the guy off the board unless he has some sort of growth on his projection chart. Without a comment, it doesn't look very likely, but
Mm-hmm.
I suppose there's always a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I would think he's probably like maxing out as like an 8 in IQ in college.
Yeah, if he's growing at all, which he is,
He
I
grew
think
one. Yeah.
you can maybe say that he's probably going to go again. We've seen a lot of these guys at their senior year, so they tend, from my experience, to grow twice there and twice at college level. So
Mhm.
at best, probably looking at what, an 8, 9,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
somewhere in there. So not bad. So at that point, it's not nearly as bad as a 6. So I think definitely worth recruiting. Uh, the real question is how many points does he want to pour into a player like this, even
Hmm.
against an out of state opponent? Players that are 5-star, players that have 13 potential and have a skill index that's kind of growing to the point where they can start in a higher division. Those guys tend to usually go for a lot of contacts. So he's going to have to make a call here. Do you just pour into Schubert and hope to get him? Or do you start looking around and reconsider, especially if more teams start to enter the fray? Do you think you have a legitimate shot at your level of getting him? So
Right. Yeah.
it's going to be a question. If it's just Notre Dame and him and he gets to meet him first, why not?
Yeah, that's true. I would think it looks like the type of player that will definitely get more competition. Um,
It's a
and
puny
yeah, it's not a
vertical.
bad prospect. I know that's just what I was looking at too.
I don't think it'll impact whether the guy can play. It clearly looks like he's going to be a player, but wow, that stood out at the very end of me.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like the physical measurements are not great, but the SI is good. All right. So we've talked about 4 programs. Let's move on. Um, where should we move on to? Let's go on to Kalamazoo. Are they next for you too?
Sure, I got them up next.
Awesome. All right. So Kalamazoo, their issue. Oh yeah, this is interesting. Their issue is that their top 2 guys in SI are both seniors, or the top 5 guys are seniors, but really the first 2 were the question marks. But they're low pot, but they might be usable. So I don't know. What's your advice with this situation?
Again, it's going to be a situation where the player has to know kind of what they're facing. While I would have liked the time to sit there and analyze 15 teams and kind of see where Kalamazoo was amongst the 16, we kind of rapid fired these a little bit in the last couple of days. So I didn't
Yeah.
get a great chance to look at it. But I would
Mm-hmm.
say this, I mean, you're going to get 10 non conference games, and you're going to probably face at least 4 or 5 teams in that non conference schedule that are going to be at your level. I mean, even if you schedule up or down, there's still games that you either have rivalries on, or there are times where the schedule just doesn't schedule up or down. It just gives you somebody kind of in your area. So I would definitely look uh, at what Kalamazoo's level is in those matchups. 122 isn't too bad.
Hold on. Let me sort by TPI first. Actually, that's not that that's like the end all be all, but usually it helps. Or I think it's more indicative than rating. Um, yeah, I mean, 122, it looks like they're like just right in the middle of this conference, just in terms of TPI. I mean, we've seen that it's not all about TPI, but
So
yeah.
you would say that he's probably got a chance to go up, might have a chance to go down. Just depends on how injuries happen or how that TPI balances on his players. Um, so I'd give it a
Yeah,
shot. I think
I,
with
I
some of the
I would
seniors.
say I would say it's really not likely he has like he goes up. I would just more worry about going down, and he's got some cushion still. But
Uh,
yeah,
I mean, he's not going to catch Navy if you just go on this TPI number, right? I mean, 138 basically versus a 122.5.
Yeah, even
You
if Navy didn't improve at all, like I don't know if Kalamazoo catches him.
and then you look at Colby and Army and say, well, they're 10 and 8 SI ahead or somewhere in that general window. But that's still not necessarily a cushion that is not overcomable. We don't know if those are all huge SI numbers on guards or if they've got them well balanced. That tends to mean a lot in this calculation is, do you have the bigs to compete with your opponents?
Mhm.
Because I guess logically you can sit there and say, okay, a guy's a little bit too tall, but it doesn't seem to really impact whether or not they can dribble effectively. I would look at somebody that's 7 foot and say, if he's dribbling, he's not going to dribble like someone that's 5'10". So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to take the ball away from the guy that's 5'10". But I haven't seen that translate to this game. So I
Right.
think from that perspective, you look at it and say, okay, that's why the height is such a commodity on bigs, but isn't such a big deal on guards because you only have so many people that can play that big role based on their height. You're not going to start a guy 6'4", even if he's got great inside defense most of the time.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, let's see. Okay, so with this roster though, I mean, yeah, so I mean, I think the main piece of advice is you gotta definitely look at the how you stack up in the conference and try to look as in detail as possible for like the makeup of the rosters, right?
yeah, in this specific case, looking at Kalamazoo, I would say the chances are not as good as they did just based on the TPI that we saw on the other page.
Mhm.
And the reason I say that is I'm looking at the heights, I'm looking at the inside talent. I just don't see this team having quite the inside talent that I would think other Division 5 schools would have.
Right.
So I would be inclined to kind of be willing to mail it in if the first even 5 to 10 games don't go well and just start your guys the rest of the way. They're kind of younger.
Okay, yeah, I know. I can see that. I kind of agree that like definitely height wise, like the heights aren't really good, and then the interior defense, it's mediocre at best.
Yep. A lot of the guys that have the best values on the team have height that's in the 72 to 74 window as far as their height.
Hmm.
The guy that you're hovering now, Quinlan, I think is probably their best guy as far as his height and his inside defense rating are concerned as a combination.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Um, okay. Let's see.
But
Did you
looking at
have?
his, well,
Yeah, sorry.
just a quick comment on kind of some of the players he's got. I don't mind any of the three that he's kind of got in the 88 to 92 SI range as kind of being guys that you take a chance on
Hmm.
because you can push those up faster than bigger schools. We talked about that a couple of minutes ago.
Yeah.
Uh, where I kind of set the bar though is about an 85, maybe preferably a 90, but usually an 85 is about as low as I will go on that. So I think a guy like Daniel Marion, who's sitting down at the 76 level, unless he redshirts and or has a pace early on in his red shirt where he's just looking like he's going for 15 or 16 or 17 skill index increase. I just don't think he's worth that value as much.
Yeah,
Uh,
I agree. And his high school rates definitely don't indicate that is
yeah.
those type of years are coming.
Yeah, he's certainly wonky in that. He's got the 6 SI gain as a freshman, and then he paced out to basically an average of just over 12 the
Hmm.
last handful of years. So his pace hasn't been awful, but he may be one of the guys where I would tag him with the red shirt and not play him. And if he only gains 5 or 6 SI in the first half of the season, that would put him on pace for an 88. If he gained 10 on the bench 2 years, you'd have him at a 108. Are you going to start a 108? I don't think anybody is probably going to start a 108 in most situations. So I think you would probably pull the red shirt off of him at some point if he doesn't develop and just kind of let that kind of player cycle through and target somebody that's probably 10 to 15 SI above him going
Hmm.
forward.
Yeah, agreed. It's tough when they're low SI, but also guard. Like I'm more comfortable if it's lower SI, but they're a big man, basically, right?
Yeah, because as a big man, if you have a 10 inside shot, 10 outside shot, and then have like 2 or 3 as your range, nobody's going to look at that range and say, oh, that's going to kill the big man, because you're not expecting them to throw more than 1 3-pointer every other game at most, and
Hmm.
just kind of be in one of those weird situations, because
Hmm.
that's not what they're there for. So there's definitely situations where you can get away with less SI on a big. Uh, but as you said, he's a guard, and I just don't think that he's going to make it specifically in this case. So my advice is, unless you see somebody and he's developing at a rate of 15 to 20 SI in high school at that skill index number, or a lower skill index number, I'd probably just pass.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. Now let's move on to who do you have up next? Is it Iowa or Texas Dallas?
I got Iowa and then Texas Dallas
Iowa.
after.
Okay, so Iowa has a very specific question, but I think a lot of us have this type of question with our rosters. It has to do with who do we redshirt this player? And so the player they're asking about, I believe, is Dwayne Anthony.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You already probably know my response based on what I do with my team, but
Oh,
of course,
yeah, right.
of course, you're redshirted. Always redshirt. No, but I think this was one of a couple teams that had a question on their big, but uh, looking at what he's got on the team, he's got a whole bunch of guys kind of in the same height level. He's got a
Mhm.
lot of players that have a decent SI. I mean, you've got Walsh at a near 130. He'll probably be 130 after we leave exhibition games.
Yeah.
Uh, you have Chandler, who's sitting at a 132. Even your international player sitting at a 132 has enough inside defense and just enough height to make it to where he could really play a big role if you needed him to. So, I mean, and that's not even including some of the guys that kind of have the inverse build where they have higher PD, like Nelson.
Nelson, yeah.
Uh,
That was the first guy I saw.
yeah, you've got a whole
Yeah.
bunch of guys in this player or on this roster that can kind of fill the same role as Anthony, maybe not as effective from an inside shooting standpoint. But if you're not afraid of falling down by redshirting the guy, then I certainly think you would take a chance on this guy in this specific case.
Yeah, to me, Anthony, I would definitely redshirt him too. This interior defense, you got to get it up. I know he's the best scorer, but I think Iowa can make do inside interior scoring with Berzins and Chandler, Bishop even. I mean Bishop could play inside a little bit if he wanted
Yeah.
to.
He's
Um,
undersized, but I would consider it at least, even though his rebounding and his handling are also low. I guess maybe now I'm looking at him, maybe not so much. But,
yeah, sometimes we talk ourselves out of it.
but even
um,
his freshman, his true freshman, he's got what, Keller at 83. He's
Keller.
got a Forrester at 81 and a half. They've both got decent inside shot. They've both got decent rebounding.
I
You
mean,
could
Brown looks really
technically,
good too. Yeah,
yeah, Brown's build. I
Brown's
guess my
really good.
concern with Brown and Forrester are, again, I look at IQ and I'm like,
Mm,
I'm looking at those two and I'm looking at Keller's IQ and I'm saying,
that's a
this
big
is a pretty
difference.
easy decision as to who I would like to play probably most of the time. But you could probably get away with redshirting one of these guys in their sophomore season if you really wanted the depth to
Hmm.
add to your big pool, so that you could redshirt Dwayne Anthony and get away with it.
Yeah, basically, like I think you redshirt Anthony because you have so many options for taking his place that are like not as good in some places, but maybe good in other areas. And overall, like it's probably close enough.
Yeah, I think it's, again, I don't know if he's got somebody in the exhibition schedule, but even early on in conference or non-conference play, you'll be able to figure out exactly where you stand with the players you have. Uh,
Hmm.
if he's matching up and doing well from a coaching perspective, and he's not at any threat to demote, and he doesn't think he has a chance to promote with Anthony in the lineup this year, uh, looking at this conference already, I see somebody who's won the national tournament in it, maybe even 2 teams there at the top of the list. A lot of teams that I recognize that are talented
Yeah.
managers. So definitely going to be a tough conference to pull through on. But
Yeah, let's just take a look real quick at like how they compare TPI, which again, not the whole story.
yeah.
Is that 3 point? Was that 3 point what? No, I should.
Oh,
Oh, okay, four.
yep.
I mean,
4.
they're top 100 overall in TPI, and like I think top 7 in the conference. So
Yep.
I'd say that, and a big gap to 8th too. So I'd say they're pretty comfortably ahead of demotion at least.
Yep. You probably take that 140 down to about a 135 or 130 when you take away a player of Anthony's caliber. But
Mhm.
even still, you'd be fighting amongst a handful of schools for what looks to be the like 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th slot. So it could be a little bit dicey, but you still do have that player for 5 games. I mean, oftentimes we look at a red shirt in college basketball and we don't see them hardly playing at all, or we see them play and then they get hurt and they get a medical on it or something
Mhm.
along those lines. In this game, you get 5 games. So you could hold that guy through your non-conference, through your exhibition don't count, but you could hold him through non-conference and play him against weaker teams in your estimation that you think you can get wins off of. And all you have to do is find some of those teams that are kind of 10th, 11th in terms of their finish position. And you can kind of play that guy against those specific teams and come out with some victories there and maybe push yourself out. So I think that Iowa's certainly going to have enough talent and probably has uh, enough bigs for sure and enough guards to kind of carry them without Anthony. And then you add a good manager on top of that. I think it'll be fine.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about the next team, and this is going to be kind of like a lineup specific one. Where are they? Texas, Dallas. Let's go into them.
Yep. So this is a returning manager.
Yeah, he's been playing for a long time before, not this specific profile, but I know he used to play.
I'm pretty sure he played out in Nevada or somewhere on the southwest of the country, and so I remember him having some run-ins with some of the Texas teams from that standpoint. And he's once again found himself in the heart of a battle amongst Texas teams.
Mhm.
But his overall roster setup, I guess he's questioning whether or not he can really compete with the roster he has, or if his specific lineup card looks good to me.
What conference
Um,
is this again? This is LL6. So I guess he wants to promote. Is that the goal?
I would assume his goal is to promote.
Okay.
Looking at his team, I think it's kind of fringe. I think he might be able to coach his way into promotion, but I think that also it depends on who he's got in there. I didn't see teams when I looked at it earlier that stood out to me as being some of the top teams or
Yeah.
managers coming down to play new schools like we had nobody Jones go and play a
UPR.
Division
Yeah.
6 school recently. So there's definitely some managers down there that know what they're doing. Uh,
A few. All right, let's see. Just based on like TPI and any names. I mean, if Occidental, I believe is like bought or a guy who last logged in over a month ago. um, so I mean, Texas Dallas is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7th, but like only 8 behind Occidental. I think they have a shot. It appears Butler or Nobody Jones and Holocron teams are in this conference though, but pretty
yeah,
far down.
yeah, but you got to be careful with managers like that too. So, like
They're
legit,
tricky.
Ellington, in my opinion, can play 5 or 6 SI above his team's level just because he's had experience coaching, and
Mhm.
you kind of give somebody that credit. Um, that being said, he's got a couple other teams definitely in that conference that are going to have that same benefit of the doubt to me.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. I know Chico State's been their manager's been playing for almost a year now, I think is what I saw. Yeah, close. So I mean, he's definitely got some experience.
So
Um,
when I looked at his team though
yeah,
specifically, I
yeah.
kind of get the feeling it's not going to make it this year
Mhm.
specifically. And the reason why I don't know that it'll make it necessarily is because I don't know that he has the defense up to a level that's going to be able to compete with some of the better scoring threats in the conference. And while they may hold their own offensively for a good portion of the game, I think their skill index, at least at the like number 5 to number 7 spots on your lineup card, are a little bit weak. So
Yeah,
when I looked through his team and came up with a lineup, I think his lineup card that he produced was Colbert, Lewis, Terry, Monroy, and Sadowski.
yeah, right, right.
And to kind of give
Which
you,
makes sense, like just based on the surface, I think. But you have something else?
so when I looked at it, I almost went a completely different direction with it. So I
Hmm.
went with Miles as kind of the first candidate for the point guard, Stacy
Hmm.
Hicks, and then Terry and Sadowski. And the reason why I kind of turned it around was I kind of see Lewis as a competent enough scoring threat and passing threat to where I don't care necessarily that he's got a 5 in his perimeter defense. So I would consider redshirting that kind of player and just making him stronger going forward.
Hmm.
And then a lot of the other guys, while they don't line up with your skill sets that you traditionally look at for those positions, I mean, Miles has 16 IQ, but his passing and his handling are probably a little bit weak for the position.
Yeah.
But he's also got good speed and he's got a little bit higher perimeter defense to start with. So I see enough there where I would consider kind of giving that guy a whole bunch of playing time, see if you can't bump him up to close to 130, 135 by the time he hits his redshirt sophomore year.
Hmm.
If you get guys like that that can just fly up the charts because they get playing time, and you match them with Lewis, who at that point might be 10 or 12 SI above his 135, then you've got
Hmm.
two guards basically that are sitting there 135, 145, and both of them will have 3 seasons with you at that level. So
Let's take
that's
a look
kind
at
of,
Miles' growth, SI wise. Sorry, you were saying?
yeah. So the reason why I kind of went with the roster I did, it was a lot of kind of uh, underskilled players at this point in their careers, but they have the time benefit that some of the other players don't have on his team. And they have slightly better skill indexes or slightly better potential, or they just have skills in the right spots. Like Miles, again, won't be the best shooter necessarily. He'll be a competent shooter, but not the best. But
Hmm.
he's still going to have good perimeter defense, decent enough passing, decent enough shooting, great speed. He's going to have a lot of attributes that at Division 6 are going to run other teams' players into the ground just because they are bots that don't have the same ability to recruit all the same talent or similar talent that kind of mesh well together.
Yeah, yeah. So again, you said Miles at the point,
And I think,
Stacy at shooting guard, right?
yeah, which again, if you look at him, you say, wow, this guy really isn't much of a shooting guard. He's
Yeah.
actually kind of another point guard. But again, if you pull this guy into, say, a 130 bracket with 3 seasons to go, suddenly that view changes. And if you put both him and Miles in this discussion and one of them goes off and one of them doesn't, well, then you have a second guy that you can start alongside Lewis,
Hmm.
and you have two guys instead of just one that have this high skill level for you for the next 3 years.
Yeah, yeah.
I can tell you that Stacy's, based on what you're looking at now, probably is not going to be the one that wins those two players. But
Right,
you
right.
never really know. I mean, sometimes they just don't develop or don't develop very well at high school level, and suddenly they just go crazy.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely seen that too. Yeah. Okay, so that's your backcourt, Miles and Stacy. Interesting. Sure.
Yep. And then I'm just giving Hicks a chance over some of the other guys
Hmm.
because again, 12 potential, redshirt freshman, 5-5 defense now, but if he gets 20 points instead of just 10 on the bench, as far as his skill bumps, there's no uh, real obstacle that says he can't get to the point where he gets to 7-7 in his interior and perimeter defense as a sophomore. If he gets to a junior level, maybe he gets to an 8 and an 8. And at that point at Division 6, are you really that far behind anymore? I don't know that
Yeah.
I've seen enough teams down there that have the traditional small forward to say that he won't be competent enough at that point, especially given his offensive production.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
Obviously, the one
Sorry.
obstacle on the flip side of this is you almost have to look at him more as a power forward because he has one stat on the right side that is low to the point where he almost can't play guard position anymore.
Yeah.
But again, just giving guys chances to maybe become something is another perspective that he hadn't looked at necessarily with his team when he was putting his roster together. So I'd at least consider those options. But then I think I rounded out with Terry, who's the senior, and I forget if it was Sadowski still. Yeah, it was. So I kind
Sadowski's
of,
still at center. Okay.
yep, Sadowski's still at center. It makes perfect sense to me. And he's still
Hmm.
young too, so maybe he'll go off.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, he could either compete and he could run his roster out, and I wouldn't say that that's a bad idea. Uh, but I think it's worth considering going either way, depending on whether or not he thinks he can coach his team above its current skill index to the point where he can promote.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, if he wanted to compete, he would probably not redshirt Lewis, I guess, and Monroy would be more in the picture.
Yeah, you would definitely play those players. Monroy's kind of a interesting player. He's not really good at any one thing. He's not really bad at any one thing necessarily. So he's just kind of a good all around bench guy. Like I would fill him as like the sixth man across two or three positions if I were playing a lot of the youth, anyways.
I see. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I like that. I like those suggestions for this team. Um, okay, and then let's see. One of our last few teams. I guess we still have like a few more. Sorry, it's running so long. I hope you don't have. Hope I'm not
Now,
keeping you from anything.
I mean, the wind chill outside's supposed to be -20 today or tonight,
Oh,
so I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying,
oh
definitely staying
wow,
inside.
it's sunny here.
Yeah. Well, usually Missouri's kind of feast or famine with weather, but man, it's really gone cold last
Mm,
couple days.
mhm. So we're gonna take a look at Minnesota here, and I kind of sprang this to you at the last minute, so you haven't had as much time to prepare, or any time probably. But their main question was they've been stuck in LL5 for like 4 or 5 seasons, and they just want to they they want to figure out how to get over the hump, and they've been in non D1 for like 9 seasons, not just this president though.
Yeah. So it looks like he got kind of unlucky in 2016, if we're being fair. I mean,
Oh yeah.
fourth place, 22 wins in some divisions or in some conferences that promotes.
Mm-hmm.
So um, I would
Yeah.
write that up to just being unfortunate. You can't really be too down on yourself for producing that result.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Looking at the team, I think the two things that stand out to me off the bat are a little bit of the height and more the inside defense. I think the height kind of eliminates some of his players just
Mm-hmm.
because they don't have the rebounding and inside defense. Like Lofton to me is like he's tall, but he's not so tall that you can kind of sit there and play him with a 4 handling, a 7 inside defense, and a 6 rebounding because he's not really going to play good possession basketball for you as a big. And I don't know that he necessarily does well enough as a defender for you. So really all he's doing is bringing his 12 inside shooting to the picture and just trying to beat everybody as kind of a one trick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Um,
I agree. I can see that.
and I do like Gray. I mean, I sat there and talked about how I'm okay with an inside defender who's not necessarily the best as long as they've got another stat that kind of gives them control. And I mean, 15 rebounding probably is close enough to the point where I would say it's going to beat every other team's rebounder or their
Mm-hmm.
primary guy.
Mm-hmm.
You put him with Rogers and you got a 15 to 13. I think this team's probably going to be number one, number two in rebounding. So
Yeah, especially with these strengths as well, though, too. I mean, that is going to
Yeah.
help a lot.
But I think that if he's lacking somewhere as a team,
Mhm.
it's definitely inside defense. And then I don't know that he necessarily has the best of inside shooting. At 12 is not bad, but if Lofton were a senior, it would be a different story, I think. If he could get him and redshirt him and then get him up to a 14 or a 15, then maybe you've got something there. You say, all right, this guy's a huge weapon inside. But I think a lot of teams kind of have that 9 or 10 inside defense. And a 12 inside shot against a 9 or a 10 is really only a 2 or 3 separation. So
Mhm.
you're looking probably at a decent shooting percentage, but you're not looking at a top end shooting percentage. And you couple that with kind of iffy or marginal at best rebounding, defense, and handling. And you've kind of got just a basic number 3 or number 4 big on that guy. And again, just nobody that's really a stopper to me there. So personally, if I were to advise him on anything, probably just look that way as far as his inside players are concerned. Get a good mix of different types of players, perhaps. See if he can't find something else that works there. But other than that, just kind of stick with it. I mean, if you're top 8 at most seasons and you're top 4 and just miss, uh, I tend to believe that you're going to find your way out of there at some point in the near future.
Yeah, let's look at where like they kind of stack up. I mean, because if this question is more about um, promotion, then let's look at it. Well, I mean, they're number 2 in TPI in their conference, so
Yep.
it's not a super strong conference, but hey, maybe the luck will be better than in this case compared to 2016.
Yep.
I mean,
So
just off the bat, like these 3 teams look like they're well separated from the rest of the conference, right?
yep. So maybe just look at your tactics. If you're playing up tempo and your shooting percentage is at the same level as your opponent, do you really want to keep going up tempo or do you want to slow it down? Do you want to look at, are you turning the ball over a whole lot? Or are you turning it over a little? Are you rebounding better or are you rebounding worse? I mean, you just have to kind of look at these metrics and make a call as to what
Mm-hmm.
your team's good at. And then just from there, focus on what your team can do well and not worry so much about the matchup play. Um, Matchups come with experience, or in my case, probably never. I'm just bad at it. But uh, just keep working your skill matchups. Just again, he's got good players. He's got a 165 shooting guard with the potential to play a little bit of point guard. He's got another guy who's perfectly fine just being the point guard next to that guy. So
Mm-hmm.
he's got the 2 guards. He's got a bunch of bigs that at least have rebounding. Some can shoot pretty well. Some have a little bit of defense and a little bit of handling. Some just again, just the only thing that doesn't really exist at this point is that one stopper at inside defense. So I think you can get by
Yeah,
with it.
yeah. I think this is it's like a decent offensive team. Um, Decent speed. The stamina is not super high, but I think they can run deeper into their bench than probably some teams I've seen in LO5. Especially if they're that high up. Sorry, wrong conference. High up in TPI. Good handling, pretty good IQs. Yeah, I mean, I think this may be just the season they promote, and then look, our advice worked just like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to give advice when a team's got itself in a really good position already. It's hard really at that point to just pick out what went wrong. I mean, what went wrong in this case is just needs to find a new lucky charm or something. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at it just last season. I didn't look at all of those seasons previously, but like they gave up 46% from the field last season, which is high. That's a really high number, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, and
I've seen better. I've seen worse. Again, his when you look at this, there's a couple things that I look for. The first thing I see is that his assist, steals, and turnovers. I look at that kind of as a possession stat,
mhm,
as a combined group. Uh, he's turning the ball over 2 more times a game than his opponent. He's stealing 2 times less, and he's just kind of holding serve with his opponents there as
mhm.
far as the assists go. So somewhere along the line, he kind of had these players turning the ball over too often. Looks like Spencer as I guess that was his point guard in this setup. Five
Yeah,
assists to four, 5 assists to 4 turnovers. So somewhere along the way there, he just wasn't producing at the level he should have. I don't know specifically what the
Sure.
case may be this time, but
Yeah, let's take a look. I don't know. That's interesting because he's a really good ball handler. He's pretty smart.
yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, did he have any games before the season? Let's take a look here. No, that was really his first time starting. So maybe you write it
So
up to that.
yeah, yeah, the kind of that experience factor we'd been talking about, yeah, before. Yeah. So maybe this is just the year for them. That'd be good.
Yep.
Okay. Well, now let's see. Let's try to take a look at Huntington. Have you ever been in Legends?
Nope.
No. Okay. So how do we give advice to Bridger then?
Well, my notes are pretty simple on this one. I know Steve isn't really interested in money, but I think this is one of those situations where you just try and send him something and hope it works out for you. Because I really don't know that there's much I could say here. I mean, if you look at what he's got for Division One, he's got one guy that's definitely at the level of Division One. He's got a couple of guys that are definitely capable of playing reasonably well there, and he's got a decent enough group of guys that you consider bench guys, but those guys are now his number 4 to number 6 players.
Mhm.
So to me, he's basically going to have to hope like there's 2 or 3 teams in Division One this year that randomly just don't have a lot of talent going for him. I know there's at least one, but I don't think there's 2 or 3 of them this year.
Right, right. Yeah, for context, Bridger asks us, how does he not demote out of
Yeah.
Legends?
How not to demote with a roster that's, I would guesstimate at this point, is probably 14th or 15th best if we looked at that rankings list.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, we can, but it's not going to be pretty.
No, no, it's going to be something he already knows is bad.
Oh, wait, wrong thing. Okay. Um, yeah, 15th there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the bright side is if you look above Huntington at the next level extends for quite some time. If you only kind of bump it by 2 or 3 SI, there's a whole group of teams that are
Yeah,
all at 139 to 142, and
yeah,
maybe even going all the way up to Rochester as you just did at 145. I mean, any of those teams, you could technically give him a shot at out coaching, but again, these are all teams that have made it to Legends, so
you
there
figure
shouldn't
they're
really be anybody up there that can just absolutely throw games left and right for you. So
Mhm.
uh, it's it's one of those where I guess if you're going to try something just kind of on a whim, maybe you just throw a whole bunch of coaches that are assistant coaches that have 13 and 14 development, and you get like a 20 developer as your head coach, and you just try and push the pedal on some of the guys you got in there because he's got good players coming in. It's a lot of underclassmen. So
Yeah, yeah. Oh, here's your team, Sacred Heart down here.
yep,
All right, you're looking good though, pretty good.
we got a shot. I don't know if we'll promote, but we'll play in D2 this year.
Hmm. All right. I had questions for my own teams. I don't know if anyone wants to listen to that though. So
Yeah, it can. I mean, the only other team I have on my list at all, I think, was Trine, and that's
oh,
it.
that's right. Trine. No,
And
we
it,
should talk about that. I want to prioritize the listeners more.
yeah,
Um,
he
did you
gave
have
me
any
the
other? I forget.
he gave me the Archie Miller structure of team and show you how much
Yeah.
college basketball I actually watch. I had to go look up what he was talking about. So I'm more of a baseball and a hockey nut. I just love
Hmm,
some management games and number games, so that's why I'm here. Uh, but
gotcha. Okay.
but from the looks of it, the structure is more or less. uh, I would think at a pro level, it's what, a box and one, where you have one guy on the perimeter and 4 guys kind of down low in a zone, trying to stop people from getting in there,
Mhm.
uh, and just play that one guy on the ball and have the other four zones. So if that's the play, I kind of question whether or not you can actually pull that off at the current moment in this game. Uh,
Yeah,
you
you
have
can't
to
really customize
basically,
the defense.
you can either go pressure, you can go uh, zone, or you can go man to man. Those are kind of your three major categories to choose from. So I don't think you can mimic that. It seems like he's looking at maybe a height uh, team as far as what he's recruited in recently. I'm kind of
Yeah, it's
looking
really
at all
tall.
of his freshman and sophomore, and he's got a couple of 83s in there, and a whole bunch of guys sitting, north of 78. I mean, he's only got what, two players in the last two classes that are more guard height. So
Hmm.
I can see what he's trying. I think again, my advice would be if you look at a guy like say Haller, who's at 76, probably isn't going to make it. So even as a big, his biggest stat, Grant Haller, is at outside shooting.
Hmm.
So if that's his greatest stat and his IQ's at 3 and his inside shooting's at 5, rebounds out of 4, I don't see enough there where it would lead me to believe that he's got stats in the absolute right spot to make that 76 actually play like an 86. So a guy like that, I'd kind of let go by the wayside. And uh, after that, I mean, I guess you just have to load up on defense if you want to play this kind of defensive formation, because I guess
Well,
inside defense would probably be number one if you're trying to prevent the uh, players from scoring inside, just want to force them to the outside. So maybe just
well,
stack that.
it said he wanted to play with big guards, and right now I just don't see any big guards.
Yep.
Basically, I mean, so I guess my first point of advice is to get big guards. I mean, Adam Watkins, like, I guess he could be a big guard.
Yep. You could definitely kind of turn him around. You could probably play Atkins as more of
Yeah.
a guard, but he's again, you're not looking at much more than a point guard, and a point guard with kind of low speed and low handling. So it really wouldn't
Hmm.
work too well, in my opinion, as a
Yeah, yeah.
primary option.
I I would hesitate to put Aikens as a point guard, I
Uh,
guess.
Even at
Yeah.
6 speed, it looks like Kohler is like the 6 speed, 6 IQ, but when you see that passing and handling rating, I guess you have to kind of default to that for another year or two,
Yeah.
because he's probably going to get close to, well, like, he's out of room, but if he had another potential room or wasn't soft capped, you could see him getting maybe even 20/20 on his passing and handling. That'd be kind of
Hmm.
ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't see any big guards really right now. So I mean, I guess that's where they head to if they want to run this type of team.
Yep,
Um, I guess they're on one player right now, and I guess he could
definitely,
be that type of guy.
definitely is a big player.
Yeah,
82
I mean
inches again here, so it's
his IQ is really low, or not real. It's not good though. Yeah.
yeah. If it's developing, he'll get to 9 or 10 at most. If it's not developing, it's there.
Yeah.
But he's going to be a shooting guard no matter what, because he's just not going to have enough IQ and or passing to really kind of push that spot. So you're looking at a shooting guard, and again, if you're looking at kind of playing this massive wall of inside defensive zone, even with good all around defensive player, I kind of see a 4 ID as kind of too low to be capable of playing kind of inside. So yeah, maybe just not, don't look at the height necessarily and just go for the inside defense on your guards as well as your bigs, and try and play this style of play where you're just going to stymie anybody that tries to shoot from a guard position on any of the jumpers or any of the drive to the nets.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some success with like having big guards. I have like a couple 6'7", or I've run like 6'5" to 6'7" point guards, and their OFG, their opponent field goal percentage is like usually pretty good. Um, I figure it's just because, yeah, they prevent like a lot of mid-range stuff with their length. And I think
Yeah,
their IDs have usually been like 10. Sorry.
yeah, I could see that working. I personally kind of play the more traditional systems. This is not one of those where I know the answer really to uh, the guy's question as far as how do you kind of play that way. I don't know if it'll work, but certainly if he wants to give it the effort and kind of see where the ID fits, and if you say it kind of has, uh, you've seen it played well or you've played it well yourself, then I would tend to believe that too.
Well, I mean, defensively it's played well, but offensively they definitely have not been ideal, I feel like, for whatever reason. It's not like they have, the capital PG, so they know the position, but like there's always been some type of struggles with them offensively. And it may just be
Yeah,
because it was their first year, really. So we'll see next year. I think I'll have better analysis on that.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I should throw in one of my teams just because, I mean, what's the point of doing this podcast? So I asked you about New Rochelle's forward situation. More for a couple, like not this season, but next season. Cause so Hammond, he's my center for sure, and he's gonna graduate, of course. So then I have a bunch of forwards, Hosteller, Mobley, Banning, and Shields, who, I mean, obviously some of them are eligible for like centers too. So and Hills too, actually.
Yeah.
I was wondering what to kind of do here, splitting up their minutes and everything, and where to even play them, because I think I can fit a bunch of them like
Yep.
at different spots.
So Hill, I'll give you. I kind of had to run down a whole bunch of notes on this one because it's a lot of movement here. But Hill, I almost think can play as kind of an oversized or kind of larger small forward than.
Hmm.
So if you're going to do that, his rating or his positional grade there isn't great yet. He's got nothing there, but
Yeah.
I would certainly look at playing him in exhibition, maybe even non-conference if you don't really care about getting into any sort of tournament with this team early on.
Right. Yeah. I don't.
You could, I think you can get away with kind of starting him there, getting him to a small grade there, and then just seeing how he plays.
Okay.
So that's one place that I kind of look. And the reason why I picked Hills as opposed to some of the other guys is I really didn't see him being great at rebounding, didn't see him being great at handling, just being good. And with some of the other players that you have, uh, I certainly see a little bit more in the rebounding department as far as your bigs go. And then definitely in some cases, you have guys that have very good handling as well. So if you have those guys that beat him out there, is he really going to get that many starting opportunities when you kind of want some of those ratings in there?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I think you can make him into really a good second option off the bench as a small forward, and then he can continue to play that role for you as a power forward. Um,
Okay. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but that kind of alleviates a little bit of the depth chart problems right off the bat because you no longer have to really consider him as a starter in any position. You can kind of position him across those two spots. Um, Shields, for my money, on a comparison to Gomez, I kind of looked at those two guys next.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I don't think he's as good just because while I don't mind low finishing and low driving, his comparisons to Gomez, uh, I guess they're both kind of bad. I don't know what I was looking at now. I'm looking at that like, wait a minute.
Um.
Uh,
Yeah. I'm not sure.
uh, uh,
I don't know. Gomez is kind of like he's just like a defensive play, really.
yeah.
Um. I don't know. Maybe Banning is. Did you mean Banning?
No, I think I actually was looking still at him and just,
Oh.
oh no, he has that coupled with the inside shot being bad. Okay, I see what I was talking
Oh.
about now.
Okay.
So before I was talking about where a guy has good inside defense and good inside shooting, but does he also have handling? Does he also have the ability to kind of drive in and finish his shots off, that sort of thing? Just kind of looking at every single rating. And for my money, Shields doesn't do all of the things as well as Gomez does because Gomez has that ability to actually shoot and be competent because he's just a true freshman now. So he's got an additional season if you redshirt him over Shields, and Shields at that point will be basically 5 skill behind him at that same age group, because you would think Gomez would probably pop to 10 if you redshirt him. So
Yeah.
for my money, Shields is kind of the second best guy for that role. And then I looked at Banning as basically the power forward that's basically always the power forward. So with that kind of play, I think I would play Gomez center, Banning power forward. And then I'd use Hill for the small forward, power forward minutes, and Shields more as kind of your center backup. And that just gives you the depth you need across the positions. And you can slide based on injuries from there. If there was more height differential between some of these guys, maybe that would come into play, but 80.5 versus 79.5, not really that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think you would start Shields at center over Gomez just for that single inch of height. And while Hills is technically the tallest one there, again, I see him more as kind of too weak in terms of strength, too average in terms of rebounding and some of the other stats to really kind of push him into those roles.
Yeah, I certainly never considered Hills at small forward, but I'm liking that. That seems interesting. I'm gonna try that.
I think nothing else. I don't know that he's really a starter in your eyes at any point.
No,
so
I think, yeah. He was a backup, career backup.
Yeah, so if the guy's more or less a career backup, why not try and get him a couple of roles so that he has 3 positions he can potentially fill depending on injuries and kind of just depending on which players are graduating around him.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, Gomez, I was really disappointed he didn't grow more this season. Man, I was hoping he got to 80 or 80 and a half.
What was his high school? Was it just growing every year, or did he?
He had one. He had a stall in his freshman or his first year here.
So he's only got 3. I mean, there's always a chance he could probably get to like a 80 or an 80.5, but the problem I see is that he's grown his 8 inches basically. So he's gone from a 71.5 up to a 79.5. So it's kind of what you would expect. So while there's a chance he maybe gets a little half inch there or something, I don't think you're going to see him suddenly spurt up anymore. I think that's over with.
Yeah, unfortunately, his wingspan is so good. I was so excited, and then he like kind of started to fall off with the SI growth being like kind of poor. And but I don't know. I still like him. He was a cheap pickup. He was like 13 contacts, I think.
Yeah,
so I mean, not bad.
Definitely can use those kind of players, and I think he's still potentially going to be a starter for you down the road, especially once you lose Hammond here at the end of the season.
Oh man, I'm gonna be so sad losing him.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. Cycle a whole bunch of guys.
Yeah. All right. Is there any other teams on the list that you have? I forget if there's any others.
I have an acronym, CNR. That is it. I think it might be our other resident podcaster. Let me see.
Oh, I'm CNR, and then Dominican is also my other.
Dominican. Dominican. Okay, I got both of your teams on here then.
Yeah, because Rob didn't have any questions. At least I tried to prod him for any, and he didn't. He never had any. I mean, with Dominican,
didn't want me to beat up his teams. It's fair.
With Dominican, my only real question was, should I redshirt Bruce Spann?
That's why you didn't ask, because you already knew the answer.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, you knew what I was going to say ahead of time. I think your concern was specifically redshirting versus your recruiting position.
Yeah, but that's changed at the flip already, pretty much.
Yeah, you were in for one of the big players in California, and for my money, where you're at now is probably at the point where we just wave goodbye to the player. I mean, Yeah,
Yeah,
I
we're
didn't
looking
know
at
if you were I didn't know if you're double plussed on the low and just fringe on the medium. So you're probably at least another 8 to 10 contacts away from even pushing the lowest points in medium.
yeah.
In your shoes, I think it's probably a situation where you're looking at redshirting and just waving goodbye to this guy and uh, maybe hoping that you don't run into him until he graduates.
Right, right. Yeah, I know SF is only LL5 like me, but LA, Cal State LA is D1, and then there's Zeus Pacific here, who could easily just jump up real quick.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm at low plus. I'm not afraid to show that, I guess, anymore. Yeah, I've spent 30 contacts on him, and he only got the low. He got the low at 10, and then I spent the next 20, and there was no change until the flip.
Yeah, I think one of the metrics that's kind of, um, I guess, not seen as often from a new player's perspective is how much of an impact it seems that multiple schools have in the interest level of a player. Because I've seen players that have had 5 or 6 teams on them, and it just feels like I'm at a snail's pace when I'm pressing the contact button. I might
Mhm.
hit it 10, 15 times in state and only get up one sub level. So I have to believe that there's a metric in there that says, okay, this player's got a lot of, um, he's a hot prospect. He's got a lot of heat on him on the heat index. So he's going to take a lot more contacts to bump up, even compared to where he is state wise or region wise. And I think that's
Yeah,
probably what you've run into a little bit here. He's got probably 200 contacts across 6, 7, 8, 9 teams, depending on who all's in there for even below the low or who's already bowed out after one season of putting
yeah,
points into him. So
right.
you would at least think that there's an average of 10 contacts amongst those 4 or 5 teams not listed, plus Basoy and maybe Concordia. So from there, if you're putting in 30 and San Francisco and Cal State put in 40, I mean, that's pretty much at 200 already.
Yeah, right. I know Concordia, I mean, they're obviously out of region and they just demoted from D1 to D2. So they were at medium and now they're at low. So they put in a lot more even than like what's showing, I think, at least.
Yeah, it's pretty fair.
Wow.
So yeah, it's kind of the struggle is, do you go for one of these big in-state players or do you just keep targeting smaller guys? And I think until you get to the point where you're looking at promoting a season or two within a player of this caliber's high school career, it's
Mhm.
probably not necessarily worth chasing after them. I think it's more of a situation where you want to take that boost that you get from promotion or double promotion across 4 seasons and use
Yeah.
that to basically give you the free 15, 20, 25, 30 contacts. It's somewhere in that ballpark. And it's significant. So if you get those 30 in, that's 30 less you're going to spend if that's where it truly ends up being.
I mean, I do think I promote this season and I think it's possible I promote in the next season as well.
Yep.
Um, but I'm worried I like fall too far behind, you know, in on this guy in this year,
Yep.
basically. So,
I,
yeah, I'm probably out, but
I
it sucks. I thought I had a chance.
I think the advice I would give on chasing 5 stars for anyone Division 6 is basically don't. Most of the time when you're in Division 6, you don't have your recruiting table built. Uh, the only time I chase 5 stars for reference is usually when I have contacts in for seniors and I have contacts in for juniors and sophomores, and I've got like 200 contacts across my board already. Because then if I pour 150 or 200 into a guy like this, because that's probably the crazy number that some team's going to want to spend on him to
Mhm.
try and take him from me, then I need to have my ducks in a row as far as recruiting goes, or I'm in big trouble if I don't get him, and I don't want to be put in that position. So if you are going to be a new team, I think you would probably want to wait until you get to the point where you feel like you've got enough depth in the depth chart to kind of
Yeah, I mean
handle.
I kind of felt like I was in position. I mean, I feel like my board is like pretty
Mhm.
well put in, but they're built. But yeah, some of these other guys are also taking more contacts than I expected as well.
Yep.
So it's yeah. Oh, but yeah,
Yep.
okay. Well, thanks for joining me and going over all of these teams. I'm sure the presidents of those teams hopefully enjoyed it and appreciate it.
Yep. And again, we're all here to kind of help on the Discord or on the help section of the forum. So if you have questions, there's usually somebody that's going to be willing to help you within a couple days time. So just kind of give us a shout, and most of us are pretty open again to the first couple seasons of building your team out. We tend to let you kind of go at some point and just kind of learn from there, but definitely want to see more people play this game. Definitely want to see more people stay the course with this game, because it is a fun game, and you're getting it for great value. I mean, Steve could probably charge me money and I'd pay. So
Yeah, right. Same. Well, yeah, thanks for joining me again. I guess we got to get this flip started, right?
yep, I still need to spend my contacts and see what
Yes.
players I can get. So should be
Yeah,
interesting.
same. Yeah, Rob and I and another friend are gonna try to hop in a call and talk about all of all of our plans.
I just don't let them steal your guys.
I mean, you and I are in different region. I guess you're in the same region as Rochelle, huh? But I we avoid each other.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
now.
for now. Yeah, for now. All right, Fury. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure I'll see you on the Discord.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
All right, that concludes today's episode at the Flip, big time in Hardwood season. Rob will be back in future episodes, but just me today. So signing off.